Yeah, well, let's dig in. Hello, everybody. I'm David Cooks, and I tell you what, paralysis can take on many, many forms. It can be physical like mine, or it can be psychological.
You can do anything you put your mind to. What seems impossible can be done by you.
And what we try to do is feature stories that go from difficult places to fulfilling purpose.
It may knock you down, but don't let it stop you. Got so much to give, a lot of life to live. You must go from paralysis to purpose.
You're in for a treat today.
Yeah, paralysis to purpose. Oh, paralysis to purpose.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Paralysis to Purpose, the podcast. I'm your host, David Cooks, and I want to thank you for joining us today and sharing, liking, and telling somebody else about this podcast. Also, please, we need some reviews. 5-star ones are really good. so do that for us. I say this every episode. I get to speak with some of the most intriguing and inspiring people on the planet. And today is no exception. We have Deb Mueller with us today, and she's an author of a new book called Love Hard. It is an unbelievable read. In the book, she courageously shares her journey of loving and raising a daughter, Mia is her name, who faced mental health struggles. She believes that by sharing her story and advocating for greater awareness, she can break the silence and stigma surrounding mental health. She and her daughter, Mia, speak regularly throughout Wisconsin, telling their story and talking about the critical need for more dialogue and education around the topic of mental health. Deb is a board member for a number of nonprofits. She's a member of the International OCD Foundation Advocate Program and the National Alliance on Mental Health, Wisconsin Speakers Bureau. She volunteers and does a whole lot of stuff, too. That's just fantastic. As she was putting together this book, and as I read it, you could just sense her heart to serve and to help people. She is married to one of my classmates. When I was writing my book, I met with her husband, Gary. And Gary had the original article that was written about me in 1980. And it was after I had the spinal aneurysm. It was the spring of 1980. And when I met with him and he shared that story with me, and I was able to get a copy of it and include it in my book, that was 7 years ago or so. I never knew that I'd be talking to his wife, who's the author of this fantastic book called Love Hard. So, Deb, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you, David. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
You wrote a book, and this is not an easy book to write in my mind, because you are exposing yourself to the reader. The amount of vulnerability in this book is jaw-dropping. What was the process of writing this book like for you? And when did you know it was time for you to put this book out?
I will start with when did I know? I truly felt a calling and I saw a need. As you said, I raised, loved, parented a daughter who struggled with her mental health. Started when she was 6 and it was ongoing. I mean, even to this day, she still manages her mental health. It's definitely gotten better. I kept it very quiet. I didn't want to risk judgment, criticism. I didn't want her to be looked at differently. As parents, you want to protect your kid. And I didn't want to open myself up to criticism because I felt a lot of shame that I felt like I was failing as a mom because I couldn't control my daughter.
Before you go on, I want to just ask a question in there because you said a lot in that sentence or two. When you talk about the stigma, the shame, depending on where you live, the stigma does change. If you have a white picket fence, a good job in education, this is not supposed to happen to you.
Mm-hmm.
How did you manage that part of living before you were able to talk about this?
I played pretend. You put on a happy face. And I knew, I had a wonderful husband who loved me, a very successful husband. Financially, we were doing very well. I had a beautiful house. I had 3 children. I had a stepdaughter. To the outside world, we really did have it all, So you don't want to complain. You don't want to change how you're viewed necessarily. And if it's not perfect, then whose fault is it? What's wrong? For me, it was keep quiet, put on the happy face. There wasn't even social media like there is today. So thank goodness that I didn't have to see other moms or share my own struggles necessarily or put on the happy face. But it really was about protecting my child because I didn't want her judged. I didn't want her left out of things. I didn't want other parents to say, I don't want her to be at this party, or I don't want my child to play with her because she acts out or she has emotional issues. So you keep quiet and you're very alone and it's isolating, and you listen to your friends talk about their children and they all sound like it's perfect too, when maybe, it's not. And that's what I found out as the years went on. And we got past those early years. And my daughter, when she hit college, started turning the corner. She started owning her own journey and talking more about it with her friends, with her family, which gave me a little bit of permission to talk about it as well. So I believe that God put different moms in my path who would open up to me very gently, because you're so afraid of exposing yourself. And we would have talks and they would share things about parenting and it being hard and their child not acting like the norm. Perhaps they were more physical, violent, more mouthy. They would dance around it and I would say, oh, yeah. I remember when Mia was in 3rd grade and I would share a story and it was like their eyes would light up and they would say, you understand, you get it, but you always looked like everything was okay. I had no idea. And it was this hope. There was this relief in this safety in knowing another mom got it and your kid wasn't bad and you're not a bad mom. It's an extremely difficult thing to raise a child who has mental struggles, physical struggles. And unless you're in it, nobody understands.
That sense of finding someone else who has that same experience is priceless.
Yes.
Because then you can begin you have a partner or someone that you can walk down the road together a bit and share stories and have some things in common. You have other children.
Yes.
And when I interview people who have challenges of any sort, a lot of times the focus is on the child or the parent who has the challenge. And no one asks questions about the other family members. Can you talk about the impact that loving your daughter the way you had to love her, the impact that her challenges had on her siblings and how they were able to eventually understand and not judge her?
So I struggled with mom guilt because my daughter didn't behave the typical way. And then I struggled with mom guilt because my attention was not doled out equally. I just couldn't. I had a child that needed extra attention. She needed extra help. She needed therapy and psychiatrists. And it seemingly a lot of times was about managing Mia, tamping down a tantrum, helping her get her homework done. And the other 2 didn't require that kind of attention. And so they were left not on their own, but they were often left together to go play, or, mom's got to do dinner and work with Mia on her homework. So you 2 can watch an hour of TV until dad gets home. With Gary and I, who was my husband, it was a lot of tag teaming. One of us would take Mia, especially when it was she had an outburst or a tantrum, and then the other one would take the other 2 kids, because it was also, I remember we tried to go bowling once and she had a tantrum in the car and we didn't want to wreck the experience for the other 2 kids because they didn't do anything wrong. One of us sat in the car with me and the other parent went in and got to bowl. So it was a lot of tag teaming, balancing. Our household was very volatile and there was a lot of violence with Mia. Tantrums, throwing things, yelling, very emotionally violent. My younger daughter was more scared. My son seemed to shut it out. And to this day, they are both still working to heal those relationships. Especially my younger daughter is very guarded and untrusting. Like I don't know if you're really changed. I don't know if you're different. She lived with it for 12 years and now, yeah, you're great, but I'm not sure. So their relationships are still in the healing process. Mia's aware of that. She's very open to, if you want to go to therapy with me or if you want to talk about this, but they're still working through some things, but they are much closer. And the book actually helped them both see her behaviors in a different light, that she wasn't necessarily trying to hurt them emotionally or hurt them mentally or cause chaos. It was just a symptom of what she was dealing with. Unfortunately, it was very hard, but it did help them see her in a different light.
You talked about Mia mentioned you can go to therapy with me and do other things. And that's great that she has, like you said, has kind of owned her space, so to speak, and,
yes.
and is free to talk about that. When you, in your book, finding the right therapist was like pulling teeth without Novocaine.
Yes.
I was like, what in the world?
Right. And I talk with a lot of parents about that, but the whole finding a provider, finding that therapist is so hard. Number one, it takes a long time. Number two, there's a lot of paperwork. And number three, it has to be a good fit. This is somebody that you're going to completely open up to and be vulnerable to. So you have to trust that person. They have to be kind, compassionate, accepting. Yes, the first person, I had this young child. I didn't know where to start. I think I went through my pediatrician to start to get some names. We found somebody, thankfully, her first psychologist was a wonderful woman. And that was first grade. And she helped us with tools and just talking through with things with Mia. She became my confidant because I could tell somebody how I was feeling. And she would remind me that you're a good mom, Deb. You're here trying to get answers and finding help. Now, when we went into third grade and she started getting very aggressive and I felt that I needed to protect her siblings, protect her from possibly doing something impulsively that would have bad consequences, that's when we wanted to add a psychiatrist in and add medication. So we stuck with the same psychologist, which was wonderful. But that was when then, we found a psychiatrist. I had no idea what I should expect. I had no idea about medications. So whatever he said, I believed. And it turned out that he didn't know what he was talking about. So it was a very hard emotionally, because you're looking to a person to help you, to help your child. And then it's hit or miss. Okay, well then who can? Because my child is still acting out and she's yelling and she's screaming and okay. So it was a very long journey. We did end up finding another psychiatrist who was wonderful, but that's one of the hardest parts, I think, about treating mental illness.
Yeah, there's no blueprint. And I think that there may be similar symptoms, but each person is different.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like I tell people, every person in a wheelchair each one is a separate entity of physical challenges. There are things that I can do that looks just like me can't do. And so trying to find that fit is really important.
And then we were also struggling because of her age. When a child is so young like that, it's hard to diagnose things because they're aging, they're maturing, they're immature. Is she acting impulsively because she's got this, or is she just a 7-year-old kid who's acting impulsively? Is she having these major mood swings because she's bipolar, or is she just a really amped up, high energy, but low energy kid? Nobody would want to diagnose her because she was so young.
I didn't even think about that. So you've got a young child who's developing, and it's hard to know what's actually happening and what it is. Do you think that things are better now. There's such an awareness now about mental health, at least talked about in the public arena, than it was even 5 years ago. Do you think it's better now in terms of being able to find, I don't know if solutions is the right word, or, find the people that can help in these situations?
I think it's better because there is more awareness. But I think from what I have heard from some of my mom friends, there's not enough therapists. There's not enough doctors to go around. So I was talking to one of my friends who's got a son and he's in 3rd or 4th grade. And he went to somebody, started seeing them, started on some medicine. And then that person went on maternity leave. So now you have somebody filling in who doesn't know your child and doesn't have a rapport with them. So they went with that person. And then the maternity leave person decided she wasn't coming back. And it was a 6-month wait to schedule. Meanwhile, my child is going to be expelled from school because they're acting out because we haven't found the medication that works. So from what I've heard, there's a lack of help, lack of doctors, therapists out there.
Sounds like a healthcare problem in general.
Yes.
And I don't know if this is a post-COVID thing or what, but it definitely appears to be a shortage in these very critical areas of health and serving people, which is, I don't know why that is, but it is. Let's talk a little bit about being married and how this can go either way. You and Gary worked it out.
We did.
You did. But there was a moment or two where it could have gone the other way. Can you talk about how you guys made that work and the advice you would give to married couples that are raising a child with mental health challenges? Because I think the mate thing gets forgotten a lot.
Gary and I came from 2 very loving sets of parents, but we were raised very differently. And there is an age difference. So I think part of it might be just when he was raised versus when I was. But both loving parents, both wonderful people, but raised very differently. So you bring that into a marriage. And then you have a child who's struggling with her mental health and she's acting out. Gary wanted to approach it one way. He was much more intolerant back in the day, much more intolerant, much more, she just needs to be punished more. We just need to put better boundaries on her. Very black and white. Whereas I, on the other hand, having OCD myself, could start seeing symptoms in her. And I was much more, let's just not assume things. Let's work to figure something out here. Something's going on that's different. And then it was, nope, why would we put her in therapy? We came at parenting very differently, for her especially. So the more I advocated for her, the more tired I ended up feeling because I felt like I was doing this all myself. And it's so emotional. And I've got 2 other little kids that I'm also raising. And I'm trying to keep up the house and do all that while he's working. And then you've got him who doesn't agree with, doesn't support, approaches her differently. He's not in the therapy, so he's not following the tools and the ways we're supposed to communicate with her. It was a lot of pressure on our marriage and tension. And then when we were going to go into the medication, that was another conversation. But because he was so scared of it, he became more involved. Like I don't want her to be zombied out. So he stepped up and he started coming to some of the therapies. And gradually, as I think you mature as parents, he became more involved, which was better for me because then I felt like we were a unified sense of action and a team. And now we are very much on the same page. And he's my biggest advocate, Mia's biggest advocate, very much yes to therapy. If you need medication, look what it's done to my daughter. But I think for parents, try to make time for yourselves, really do get away from the kids. Make sure you remember who you are as a couple. It's very hard. I think for dads, if your wife is the one staying home and mainly raising your children, try to listen to her, support her, have good communication. You're both working towards your children and you both love them, yes, just work together and make time for each other.
One of the keys you said is you're working together on
Mhm.
the same thing.
Right.
You want to get the same goal, and just
Right.
like you said, just the communication piece, and your husband Gary had to grow and develop as well in this.
Hmm.
He was stuck in a place for a while,
Hmm.
but over time he got what you were saying,
Right.
and then it clicked. And the other thing about self-care, one of the things that in this whole mental health conversation, um, self-care really is important
Hmm.
for all of us, but especially if you are a caretaker. I was speaking with someone today, and I said to them, the caretaker never gets asked how they're doing. It's
Hmm.
always, how's the person who's not doing well? How are they doing? And that becomes important. Can you just talk about what it was like when someone actually acknowledged you or gave you a thumbs up or something like that?
It's validating. It's being seen. For somebody to say you're doing a good job, or to see you struggle and say, holy cow, what you're doing is hard, and you're doing it. I had that similar experience when Gary had transverse myelitis, and I was the caretaker for those years. And it is very true. Everybody is very concerned about the person who has the problem, which is good. I mean, they should, but there's somebody behind them holding everything up, and that person can get really tired. And it's also an emotional journey for them because it's someone they love, whether it's Mia or it was Gary. So I just think it's so important. And it's one of the things when I found online coaching was that I became a part of this community of women, and they noticed me. And I was somebody outside of being a mom, which I loved being a mom, and it's a blessing, but I had forgotten who Deb was. And so these people supported me, encouraged me, saw me, validated me, and it made all the difference in the world.
I think we will take a quick break. But before we do, there is a quote in here that I absolutely love. And it says, it takes a village to raise not just a child, but a mom. When we come back, we're going to talk about that. Did you get that copyrighted? You might need to. We'll be right back after this short break on Paralysis to Purpose, the podcast, with our guest, Deb Mueller.
We hope you're enjoying Paralysis to Purpose, the podcast. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Paralysis to Purpose for more updates. Also, check out David's website at davidcookspeaks.com to learn more about his mission and purchase his book, Getting Undressed, From Paralysis to Purpose.
Hello, and welcome back to Paralysis to Purpose, the podcast, with our guest, Deb Mueller. I'm your host, David Cooks. Before we took a quick break, we gave a quote about it takes a village, not just to raise a child, but also a mom. Before we talk about that, I want to go back because we never really got to talk about the actual writing of the book and what that was like for Deb, and not just for Deb, for her daughter as well.
Yes. So once I felt that calling and I decided, all right, I think God wants me. I kept saying no to him. I was like, nope. And then I was like, I think he wants me to do this. And I talked to Gary and he was all on board. And then I talked to Mia and she was very hesitant. You're going to say what to everybody in the world? What? So we had a lot of conversations about it. And she eventually, she trusted that I would tell our story with respect and with dignity and with compassion. And she read every chapter, every page that I wrote. And there was always the understanding that she had final say, and anything that she was not comfortable with me sharing. Then there were a few things that she asked me to take out. And if she decided to pull the plug at some point, then this would just be a good therapy for me. So as I started and got deeper into it, it was because it is so vulnerable and it brought up so many memories and so many emotions. And it was very emotional. There were times, I would write all day, and by the evening, I just had to go to bed because I was exhausted. And you have this perspective then, because you forget a lot of that, I think. At least I did. And I was proud of myself. I was proud of Gary and I that we did this, that we did hard. And then when Mia was reading it, I think that was one of the hardest things for me as a mom, because she didn't remember a lot of it, because she would get so angry. And I talk about it in the book that she would have these blackout rages. So she would have outbursts and then not remember what she did. So to read what her behavior was, what she was like, was extremely emotional for her. And that was hard to hear your daughter come back and say, well, why did you even love me? Why? You just question who she was. I did that to my brother. Oh my gosh. So I think that was very hard. But I also think on the reverse that it was very therapeutic, because I don't think that the relationship between Mia and her brother and sister would ever start healing until she understood what they remembered. So I do think that in the end, it was therapeutic, and there was a lot of family discussions and a lot of reassurances and a lot of, we are a family and we love each other and we are safe. And of course, I loved you through this and you didn't want to be this way, but it was hard to watch her process it, live it again.
You talked about perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes when you're in the matrix, you don't even know that you're getting through it until you come out of it. And then you look back and you're like, wow, we did that.
Right.
Like we did all of that. And it gives you a sense of accomplishment, increased self-worth, all of those things that during the struggle can just seem, it's just going to work. Are we doing the right thing? You have so many nice quotes in here. Though I celebrate the strength and resiliency of my family, we will always be flawed, perfectly imperfect. And there is a rare beauty found in the rough edges that make us unique. That's really good.
I do believe that. I feel that I have taught my kids that this family unit, we love regardless. Yes, we're all going to screw up. Yes, we're all going to make mistakes. We're going to hurt each other. We're flawed, but we love each other no matter what. And we're still beautifully and wonderfully made. And God doesn't make mistakes. I tell that especially to my oldest daughter, but he doesn't make mistakes. He made each of us with purpose, with a vision, and he loves us unconditionally, and we love each other unconditionally. And we're all beautifully flawed.
You mentioned that in the book. I just turned to it. God only makes good things, and
Yes.
You are good. I want you to change the narrative and ask, who will I help? There are very few things in life that we go through that are meant just for us.
Mm-hmm.
I'm convinced that the struggles, the victories, the challenges, all of that there are people actually assigned to your journey. Can you talk about how that statement about having her ask the question of how can I turn this into something that benefits someone else? Does she understand that when you said that to her?
I don't know. She does now, but I felt bad that she had such a bad perspective of herself. When she was in some of her lower times, why would God make me this way? I don't like being this way. I hurt people I love. I worry all the times. And that's when I started thinking about, wait a second. But first of all, he doesn't make mistakes. I think he chooses each of us because he believes that with him, we can survive it. We can overcome it. We can work through it. So I wanted her to remember, and I guess I saw it too for me. Mm-hmm. When I was struggling with OCD and so ashamed and so embarrassed, and why am I like this? And never telling anyone. And then I got diagnosed and it was like, okay, I'm going to get help. This is good. And then when I saw my daughter struggling with the same things, it was like, okay, God gave me this so that I would see it immediately and advocate for her, because my poor mom had no clue. And so she would get mad at me. She would get upset. And to this day, she's like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. But she had no idea. And so I went undiagnosed for years and years and years. Because I knew exactly what it was, I could identify it in my own daughter and get her help as soon as she needed it.
you know what? You get what you need, don't you?
Yes, you do.
You may not see it right away or think it's what
Right.
we didn't talk much about your own personal struggles and growth, but how important a role it played for your daughter, because you were the last source of hope for her in many cases, because no one else in your circle understood what
Right.
was going on. Speaking of circle, it takes a village, not just to raise a child, but to raise a mom. I want to hear about the village that raises a mom.
For me, my village was my church family, the moms I met in my church, who we would have Bible studies, and they didn't know that they were being such a source of community and friendship and a life raft for me, because we wouldn't talk necessarily about the depth of Mia, but we would talk parenting and wifing and Jesus and our faith and friends. It was my mom, definitely, my spouse, once we got on board. But even before that, I at least had a significant other to support me, to help me. It's all those people that I did eventually find that never judged and that loved Mia no matter what. And it was her therapist. And in there, I say, on her college graduation, all I could go through was about every person that touched her life and helped me get her to that place. All her teachers, her coaches, her therapists, her brownie leader who understood she struggled. It certainly wasn't just me, but those people helped her, but they helped me help her.
How significant was that for the rest of your family to see that?
It was huge. Of our kids, she was the least that we expected to even be able to necessarily get to school, but then to live independent. She lived in the dorms freshman year. She graduated with a very good grade point in 4 years and had a job lined up. And I believe it's because she found something that she loved. She loves interior architecture and design. And so she got passionate. And school's much easier if you like what you're studying. So there was a lot of pride. There was a lot of pride on that day. And she was proud. She was so proud that she did it. That's what she wanted. That's when she started owning her whole journey herself, was when she was going from senior year of high school to college. And she wanted so badly to live in the dorms like her friends and to be able to say, oh, I'm going to school and I'm living in the dorms. And she knew she was going to need help. And so that's when she said, will you help me find a therapist? Because her last 2 years of high school, she was not receptive of therapy. I could do it on my own. Don't make me go. So now she wanted to do it for herself. And that's really when things changed, because now she was going for Mia so that she could live healthier, mainstream, see success, be like other kids. And so it was great. I was so proud of her.
The whole thing about belonging and having a sense of being a part of something is huge. And it's huge for everyone, whether they've got mental challenges or not. Nobody wants to not fit somewhere. What was your toughest challenge? Your darkest moment?
I think it was the exhaustion of every day there being turmoil, there being violence, there'd be yelling, there'd be screaming, there'd be threats. And you feel so sad for your child, but you feel so sad for your other kids. And like I told you, I wanted in my mind, and growing up and when we got married, our family was going to be a safe place. And it didn't feel safe a lot of times for my 2 younger kids. And it didn't feel safe all the time for me. And it was, I don't want to say disappointing, but it was so sad. Just this level of grief because you couldn't provide that. And you had this, I love this child over here so much. And I love these children over here so much. And I can't make the family unit what I want it to be. That was in high school. It started in grade school, middle school, not so good, high school, in the dynamic between the kids. And I think that was my lowest time, was just the constant tension and anger.
What got you out of that? What got you to a better place?
It was time. And again, I'm talking high school. So that's when she decided, I need to change this. And then she moved out. And then that gave us a little break. She's only 15 minutes away, so we're okay. And then when she'd come home, she started evolving and becoming a different person, more calm, more understanding. She was maturing. She appreciated being home. To this day, she is my homebody and loves to be with family and loves to be home. It was late in life, but that's when we started healing, I think. But it's been a long process. It's been a long process.
The healing process is interesting because you can feel great and still not be healed. It takes time for healing. That's probably the hardest thing sometimes is that, could we just hurry up and do this?
She is doing so well and managing and maintaining, and she is successful with a relationship and her friendships and her job. But she will have to manage this always, and we'll still have conversations that are like, whoa, we're not going back there. But we do have good communication. But there are still times when I'm like, oh, okay, this is flashbacks to something I don't want to go back to.
Right. I think that's good for our listeners to understand that this is an ongoing process. The improvements are fantastic and things are much, much, much better. But there's still ground to cover and a healing to take place. It's kind of like I tell people in 1979, when I became a wheelchair user, accessibility is nowhere near as great as it is right now. But we still need to make it more accessible. But it is a lot better than it was. I think that's important to take time to reflect and give you a perspective where you can have gratitude, where you can look and say, yeah, you know what? We did that. And that's a good thing. And I'm grateful for it. Before we go, there are 3 things I ask all of our guests. And so when you hear these words, I want you to tell me what comes to mind. And the first word is perspective.
Being able to accept your journey, accept how you managed your journey, and be at peace. People ask me, would you change anything? Would you do anything differently? Well, if I look back and say, well, sure, I wish I wouldn't have yelled so much, but I was doing the very best I could with the tools that I could. And so perspective, I think, is to own it and be at peace with it.
I love how you said, I did the best with what I was given. And you can't do more than you know. I mean, it's just impossible. Perseverance.
Doing the hard, staying when it's hard, putting in the work. Yeah.
Partnerships.
Finding who you trust and connecting with them. Linking arms, whether it's your spouse, your friends, your church, leaning into God. Partnerships are, I think, so important for success, but also for your own validation.
Before we go, if there was one or 2 things you would like for our listeners to leave with, if they don't remember anything else, what would you say to them?
I would remind parents to take care of themselves. Don't forget who you are in your parenting journey, especially if you're raising a kid that struggles. Don't forget who you are. Don't forget about yourself. Take care of yourself mentally, physically. Seek out therapy if you need it, not just for your child, but for you. Talk about it more. Try to find somebody you feel is safe and do talk about it. That is one thing I wished I would have, because there were other people struggling that I didn't know. And it would have made it better had I felt like I was heard and seen and validated. And remember, you're doing a good job, Mom. You're doing a good job. And you're the mom that God chose for your child.
Well, with that, if people would like to follow you or get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
I have a website called debmillerauthor.com, and you can certainly connect with me there, and Mia sees it as well. And that would be great.
Fantastic. Well, she's the author of the book, Love Hard, the triumphant story of a mother's roller coaster ride of loving and parenting a child with mental health struggles. Deb Mueller, you were fantastic today.
Thank you for having me.
I am so glad you came. And until next time, on Paralysis to Purpose, the podcast, I'm David Cooks, reminding you that your ability to endure is always greater than your willingness to endure.
You can do anything you put your mind to.
Thanks for tuning in to Paralysis to Purpose. Don't forget to follow us on social media at Paralysis to Purpose on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. To purchase his book, visit davidcookspeaks.com. Be sure to tune in next time for more inspiring conversations with David Cooks.
My mission is to create therapeutic spaces for Black men, safe therapeutic spaces, for us to get comfortable with talking about the things that we need to talk about, the things we're conditioned to not talk about, so that the awareness is created so that they can have that light bulb moment that I had when Derek did a wellness check on me.
Next time on Paralysis to Purpose.
When you start to see other people be vulnerable and talk about things, eventually you're going to be able to relate to someone. Essentially, I really want to be able to change the narrative. Not want to, I am changing the narrative for the overall picture of the Black man in Milwaukee and worldwide.
Paralysis to purpose.